Welcome to the Pansa Pansa Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word pansa is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Pansa Pansa Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Pansa Pansa Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Welcome to Pansa Pansa Podcast, where we explore stories, insight, bold ideas that help us grow and thrive our personal and collective journey. I'm your host, Kevin Seriki, and today I am honored again. This is a return guest to welcome Dr. Mercedes Okosi to Pansa Pansa Podcast. She's a psychologist and the author of a very powerful book called The Book of Boundaries for people who makes themselves small. In this book, Dr. Okosi explores why so many of us struggle with setting limits, whether emotional, physical, even with our time, and how reclaiming our boundaries is an act of self-worth. As the daughter of an African immigrant, of a father who is from Nigeria and a mother who is African American, Dr. Okosi's bring unique cultural and professional perspective to this conversation. Today, we will be discussing what inspired her to write this book, the different type of boundaries we need in our lives, and how assertive communication can transform our relationship. So, Dr. Okosi, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. And thank you for promoting my work. It's definitely appreciated.
You're welcome. So, what would you say inspired you to write this book with your background as a psychologist?
Yeah. So I specialize in trauma and PTSD. So I see a lot of people who already have had a boundary violation, whether they've suffered some kind of emotional or physical or sexual abuse, and working on their feeling safe again, reinforcing their boundaries and communication is a constant part of that work. But I saw that even across the more general population that I see of people who come into therapy with a difficult family background or relationship issues, problems at work, just any place where they're interacting with other people, this common theme of it being very hard for people to, one, identify and know for themselves what healthy boundaries are. And then two, especially how to go about communicating that to the world and reinforcing that so that they can either get away from unhealthy environments or promote reconciliation or the health of relationships that they do have. So it came up so often in my work with people where part of it would be like psychoeducation, talking about boundaries, and sometimes kind of a behavioral rehearsal or role play of how can I say this thing to my parent or my boss or my friend that they cross this boundary or that I want to maintain a certain boundary. And I think I wanted to produce a work that people could access so that they have both the information and an idea of how to literally formulate the words and put it in practice.
Wow, that's so inspiring. So, as a daughter of an African immigrant father and African American mom, how did your upbringing, being raised in this home, shape your understanding of boundaries?
Yeah, I will say again, and I think we maybe talked about this in the first time I was on. I feel like I am fortunate to have really great parents where I think I grew up in a mostly really healthy environment. I think you hear a lot of the sometimes harmful kind of things passed down in families where, the whole kind of like stay in a child's place and you're supposed to be seen and not heard. And there is no such thing as privacy. And while my parents had definitely rules and guidelines, I felt like I benefited from being able to mostly under their guidance and general rules about around keeping me safe, was able to like be my own person. I know I hear from like even outside of Africa, like a lot of immigrant kids are like, no sleepovers, no going to anybody's house, no doing anything except school. And my parents were really, they were the outliers in that, I guess. I think they really did a good job of teaching and leading by example that you are going to have your priorities and you're also going to have fun and make mistakes and do some learning on your own. So as long as you're getting good grades, being a kind person, doing well in all of the main areas, yeah, you can go sleep over the friend's house, but we've met the friend's parents or we've talked to them and we know that it's going to be a safe environment. Or like, yeah, you can go out and play, but stay with your brother and stay with your group of friends and come home when it's dark, those kind of things. And I think that there can be a healthy balance where, yes, you want to keep kids safe. So you're going to have them have reasonable expectations around those basic things, but not be completely too loose and lack in
Mm.
any guidance. Also, not on the other extreme, like too extremely rigid so that they are missing opportunities to develop some of their own experiences. So I
And
got a
that's
good balance. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the core parental skill that is necessary. And many people are missing is either too loose or you are too strict. And
Mhm,
if you're too strict, when they go to college, when they get older, they wouldn't know how to understand how to set that boundary because they didn't
mhm.
have the practice from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people also need to learn what are the reasonable and realistic consequences in the real world of doing things and making mistakes. Like, if you have been in a really strict environment where your primary goal is to avoid fear or punishment from your parents, then you're not learning when I go out into the world. Maybe I want to do all of these things that I was restricted from before, but I also have to take into account it's not just fear of my parents. Now it's, oh, if I do certain things, it'll have an impact on relationships or on my school or work performance or safety or all those other things where if you had at least some space to make your own decisions and mistakes before, you get that experience in a different way.
Yeah, that's so true. And the title is so striking. The big book of boundaries for people who make themselves small. Can you talk through how you choose this title and what message you're trying to send? Even for people who pick up the book and say, wow, this is so.
Yeah. Yeah, I found myself in working with a lot of people who struggled with boundaries. For example, if their boundaries were too loose and they just were kind of letting life happen to them instead of being a full participant in their own life, I would reflect that to them and say, what will it be like for you to fully participate in your life and set expectations for what you want to happen in as much as you're in control of or can communicate those things? For you to be the main character and the driver of your life. On the other hand, too, people who have too constricted or too rigid boundaries also kind of make themselves small because they can be limiting opportunities to connect with people or limiting opportunities to experience things if their world is so constricted or their boundaries are so rigid out of fears to experience and explore things. So it's really an idea of like if you're too overly influenced and boundaries are being crossed because they're too unrestricted, you're making yourself small because other people or other influencers taking up way more space than they need to maybe in your life. At the same time, if your boundaries are too rigid, you might be making yourself small by limiting experiences and connections you can have. So I think it is something that's beneficial for people who are dealing with either end of the spectrum.
I didn't, actually think of this until when you just spoke about this now. Do you ever actually think of racial boundaries too, whereby we limit ourselves?
I think that's definitely a theme that can come up in terms of like the different types of boundaries that people deal with. So in the book, I talk about like six categories: physical boundaries, intellectual boundaries, emotional, sexual, material, and time boundaries. Yeah, I guess when you bring up racial boundaries, I can see how that can overlap with other areas. For example, intellectual boundaries is about like your ideas and values and opinions. If you have like really rigid intellectual boundaries and are not open minded, that may also mean that you're limiting connections that you could have with people from other groups or people from other races. And that can come up in some of those other areas too. So yeah, um that definitely is an area to explore. And I think like to the extreme could bring up things like prejudice and bias and racism in terms of how people may be like limiting their thinking around those kind of things. But also like if someone has uh too loose of an idea of their own racial identity, may be more vulnerable to being then the target of or the victim of, and then not speaking up about their own experience receiving racism. So,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely the all the different identity components will come up
that's
in
true.
terms of boundaries too, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So, how did you? I know you mentioned it a little bit. How did you choose the type of boundaries that you included in this book?
Yeah, so the type of boundaries, it was based on just my experience and kind of like how things are conceptualized in the research that I've read and the work that I've done before, some of the like evidence-based and manualized treatments that I've done. So I just chose to expand more into those particular areas. And it's not limited to those. Like there may be more in terms of like you brought up if racial boundaries is a specific category. I'm sure people can read this and then think about if there are other distinct areas or ways where boundaries come up that are outside of these six that can be useful concepts.
Yeah, that's true. So, I know you have diversity of clientele in your practice. And do you believe certain culture discourage boundary setting more than the others? And how does that show up in your book and in your work life?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's multiple factors. So, like, I'm thinking about the broader ecological model of everything that influences us. So, you have like from the outside in, you have like, the whole world's environment. You have what specific country are you in? For example, in New York City, where I live, you get on the train and everyone's talking and there's performers and there's like, everything's busy and people are pushing and moving and whatever. But when I visited Japan, or at least the times that I've been on the train in Tokyo, it's totally silent. And it's outside of the norm to be talking loudly on the train, and everyone's just trying to get to their destination. So you have cultural norms and different things by country. What are the specific values and things that are the norms in that country too, based on cultural traditions or religion or things like that? For example, simple one that comes to mind in terms of physical boundaries, in some religions, men and women don't touch at all, especially in the like more conservative parts of some religions. If it's not your family member or you're not married, you don't even shake hands with someone of a different sex. Whereas in the US, you're supposed to like immediately shake someone's hand when you are on a job interview, kind of thing. So country specific things, then it's like your state and then your community and then your specific neighborhood and your specific family. So all of those things can inform how someone has learned about boundaries and what are the norms and what have been their specific experiences in their family and the immediate spaces that they interact that make up how they understand that. So, yeah, I think there are many answers to that question. I think the short answer is it depends on a lot, where like, and there's some people that I work with who are from more religiously conservative backgrounds who, for example, with sexual boundaries, kissing someone is serious to them. Whereas someone else may be from a more less conservative background and they kiss someone on the first date or someone that they just met, you know, and that's the norm. So it really depends. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, as a psychologist, a therapist, I could imagine the intensity of understanding different culture, different social economics background, knowing how to work with it. I mean, that's so intense, kind of work, and you have to be really gifted to be in this field.
Yeah, and a lot of it is trusting that the person that you're sitting across from is an expert in themselves, like they know their experience and how they've received their culture, um, and not making assumptions, knowing that you're not gonna even if you've read a bunch of things about a specific culture or country, that you're not gonna know everything.
And so you've talked about the six type of boundaries, like you said, physical, intellectual, emotional, sexual, materials, also, and time boundaries.
Mhm.
So let's go into each one of them. On physical boundaries, what are some of the everyday example of that boundaries, and why they often the first one we ignore sometimes?
Yeah, so physical boundaries are boundaries are like both how you're interacting, what you're letting out, and what you're allowing in. Physical boundaries meaning like how do you want people to physically interact with your body or not, and how are you interacting with other people's body or not. Um, for example, that could be your a spectrum of how comfortable you are with giving a hug, a handshake, standing close to someone. An example that comes to mind, especially during COVID, when the height of the pandemic, when we had to stand 6 feet away, and you saw the people who, for whatever reason, broke the rule and would stand right behind you in the grocery store, like so close to you. So physical boundaries are about like physical space, physical touch, all of those kind of things can fall under that umbrella. I think you said, what things do people ignore? I think with a lot of these, and this will probably cross over the different areas, I think people have the idea that it's being mean to say what I want. When in reality, you have one body to live in, at least in this present moment right now. Other people aren't allowed to just do whatever they want. And you're not allowed to just do whatever you want to other people. But it can be hard to say out loud, don't touch me, or please stand back, or whatever it might be to reinforce the boundaries that you want. So, yeah, those are some examples.
Yeah, we could also look at it like you already said before, cultural differences in terms of, being that you are in American society, Western world, where it's okay to hug and kiss and all that. Some people may find that they are not really comfortable with that, and they just have to, succumb themselves to that because they are in this society. Because people may look at them and define them based on that oh, you doesn't this person doesn't give hug, or what kind of
Mhm.
culture did you come from?
Yeah. So, yeah, it can definitely be an adjustment, but I think it's being honest with yourself about, all right, what things are important to me if I'm immersing myself in a new culture or country? Are there things that I want to adjust to and want to become more comfortable with? Or if I'm actually not comfortable, how am I going to communicate that?
Mm.
And, what are going to be the implications? Because another part that I talk about in the book is that like, boundary is not rules for other people, and it's not a request. Your boundaries are setting you up for what you're going to do if someone crosses the line. So, for example, if someone's like coming from an experience where, whether it's their family, their culture, they are like not comfortable with hugs, and they start a new job or join a new friend group where everyone hugs all the time, they can say, hey, I'm actually not comfortable with hugs. That's not my thing. And hope that the other people will respect that. But they then have to decide, now that I've said this and made it clear, if someone who has heard my boundary still crosses the line, what will I do? It's not necessarily imposing something on other people, but making your expectations known and then following up and reinforcing what you will do so that they get the message that you're serious. So it might be someone crosses the boundary, they run up and give you a big hug, even though you said, I'm not comfortable with that. Then maybe that means you leave early from the party or, distance yourself from that person or whatever it may be. That can be difficult and uncomfortable for people to do. And sometimes people end up just foregoing what they want and just continuing to be uncomfortable. Like that's the alternative, that if I'm going to state my boundary and not reinforce it with my actions or words if someone crosses it, then I just have to like keep letting it be crossed and be uncomfortable. You know?
That's true. And let's move to intellectual boundaries. How can we protect our ideas and value in relationship without being dismissive or defensive?
Yeah. So intellectual boundaries, like you said, around ideas, opinions, values. This is difficult, especially with a lot of what's going on in our like social political environment today where there can be a lot of divisiveness and it may say a lot about a person. Like you learn a lot about someone by learning what their opinions and values are. So having healthy intellectual boundaries isn't necessarily like you agreeing, because you're not going to agree with everyone or on everything. In terms of your question of the way to protect that, I talk about in the book, you having a grounded understanding of what your ideas are and maybe having them be willing to be challenged or debated in a healthy way if the other person or people you're around are providing insightful questions,
Mm,
information, and also reciprocating that. If this person thinks totally different from me, they've arrived at that thinking somehow, and maybe we'll talk and discuss, but we don't have to agree. I don't have to change their mind. They don't have to change mine or try to coerce me.
mm,
It doesn't have to lead to then personal attacks. And if any intellectual boundaries are crossed in terms of someone being put down because of their beliefs or it leading to more hostility, again, reinforcing the boundary by saying, like, all right, I'm going to walk away. This conversation is not productive anymore. We don't agree. I see that have different conclusions or ideas. And I respect that you're allowed to have your own ideas, even though I disagree. And that's okay. I think it can be hard because a lot of the things that people hold really strong values and opinions about are personal things. I also talk about in the book that it's not to necessarily say that there's no work to be done on like huge social issues, but in one-on-one or group interpersonal thing, leading to like hostility and attacks and crossing boundaries is not gonna like change someone's political ideas in the moment, most likely.
That is so true regarding the intellectual boundaries because there's so much toxic information online. And sometimes you have to also to be create that boundary by even not reading certain things because of how it's going to impact your emotion. And do you want to continue to expose yourself to this toxic information whereby it affects every aspect of your being, your peace of mind? So it's better
Mhm.
for you to just cut it right there and said enough is enough. And you're so right about that. So, on emotional boundary, why do you think it's important not to absorb or take responsibility for other people's feeling, which is very common, especially influenced by the cultural beliefs or religious belief as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I think most people don't want to hurt other people or be a harmful person. So sometimes, although it is maybe like counterintuitive to protect the idea of ourselves as like not being a harmful person, when someone else experiences a negative emotion, like taking on and trying to resolve within yourself shame about that, where as long as you're not purposely trying to harm someone, if you say something that's direct or neutral or honest and someone else has an emotional response, maybe yes, you can talk about the content of what you said and how it affected them, but you're not then responsible for the complete regulation and resolution of their feelings. And I think sometimes people get really anxious about and want to kind of guarantee a way that I don't ever want to disappoint or make anyone feel anything ever. But that's not realistic. There are gonna be things that you do that are even neutral things that someone is going to have feelings about that are influenced by so many other things within them. They could be having a bad day that day for so many other reasons. They could have had experiences in their own past that you're just this thing that you're doing reminds them of. It could be something that if they've had a traumatic past that like triggers something. But unless you're like purposefully being mean or directly insulting someone or doing something that's crossing their emotional boundary with harm, yeah, it's I've had to tell a lot of people you're not responsible for other people's feelings. And you
Especially
also just can't lie to do the work of resolving someone else's feelings, you becoming their therapist. And then that's a whole that's not
Mhm. Especially between parents and child. Sometimes, parents may absorb emotional, feel responsible for to absorb their children's emotional needs. You know,
Mhm.
even children also feeling like, oh, they may not agree with certain things. I don't want to get them upset. I don't want them to get mad at me if I make this choice. Not that we're promoting for them to make the wrong choice of maybe using drugs or engaging in behavior that could be detrimental to their life, but just making choices, even in career choice as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and in in some of the, like, more, like, stereotypical immigrant parent examples, the typical thing is that a parent wants you to be, like, doctor, lawyer, engineer thing, and then so and so wants to be a musician, and the parent will say that, "He's trying to kill me, he's trying to finish me. Why is he not serious?" And it's like, "Okay, you feel that way about this." But to put the pressure on your child that your life choices are causing me anxiety and you need to change them so I can be okay, it's just unfair. Speaking of another community, I was watching the show Indian Matchmaker where they're trying to match people up for marriage. And the mom pulled out a blood pressure monitor and strapped herself in. And she said, "See, because you're not married yet, my blood pressure is going up. Do you wanna keep making this a problem for me? Do you want your mom to be old and sick?" Or something like that. And I think it's especially damaging at a younger age, but even as adults sometimes, the pressure of a parent's expectations can lead people to sacrificing their own values and boundaries and then doing things just to avoid the criticism of parents or the community or whatever, even if it's not something that they want to do. And the reverse too, in terms of children taking on the feelings of parents, there's a concept called like, parentified child, where if a parent is compromised because of their own struggles or mental health or substance use or whatever it might be, then a kid having to take on sometimes physical labor, but also the emotional labor of, worrying about things that, for example, a 7-year-old shouldn't have to worry about, or taking care of their younger siblings more beyond the capacity of a sibling relationship. Um, then feeling overly responsible, overly emotionally responsible for their parent or their family, can be really hard too in the other way.
I mean, that's so sad that when you think about a lot of kids soaking your parents' responsibility to care for their siblings as a result of sickness. The
Mhm.
parents became physically sick and that they couldn't care for the children. And we're living in this individualistic society where everybody,
Mhm.
you know, do their own thing. The sense of that community is something that it has to be created to help out. And it's so funny you talked about a career choice that could be detrimental so for some parents and say, "Oh, do you want to kill me?" I was listening to a podcast where a guy, I think, is from both Indian background also, and he was talking about graduating from college, and he went to law school. He passed the exam, and he decided not to. practice and became a DJ 10 years later. So a lot of time they just have to find themselves. But as parents, you've done what you need to do to raise them the right way you're supposed to.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I was watching something the other day and someone said, if you want to be a parent, you have to be prepared to raise anybody. You can't guarantee that your kid is going to end up like you or how you want them to end up. So you have to be prepared that you're going to be there for safety and guidance and try to impart some values and ideas. But at the end of the day, they could have a different personality. They could have different abilities or disabilities. They could have different interests or orientations or all kinds of things where you don't own your child. You're there to guide them. And at some point, may have to accept that they have totally different feelings than you on a lot of things.
Yeah. So on the sexual boundaries, how do you teach people, especially in the community of color, to articulate and respect sexual boundary in a healthy way?
Yeah. I think this definitely comes up with a lot of people, more so I would say with women, especially just because of the like power dynamics of gender, where on the milder side, there's like the way that people may talk to you sexually, those kind of things, all the way to extreme side of like sexual assault.
Hmm.
I think people learn about their uh their sexuality in a lot of different ways. And that's also definitely like culturally bound and can also be difficult because a lot of these situations are can be in the context of like a relationship where someone can have a hard time setting boundaries because it's hard for people to leave harmful relationships. Most of the time, sexual violence or any type of violence happens between people who already know each other. So part of teaching people how to reinforce the boundaries they want around this is to the assertive communication part. You, one, if it's really dangerous and you have a way to leave, you can just leave. You can leave whenever you want to leave. You can change your mind whenever you need to. You don't owe anything to anybody. The way that the person may think of you is way less valuable than the safety of your life. At the end of the day, saying no and repeating no as many times as you need to is a full sentence. I think there are a lot of ways where women are taught to worry a lot more about being liked and being perceived as like nice and feminine and going along with whatever. And even in moments that are really dangerous, can be worried about, like, well, what will they think of me? Or feel attached to the person already and worried about losing that attachment. So it can be hard, especially if it's in the heat of a dangerous moment. If someone's having a trauma response where they're like feeling frozen to speak up. A lot of working on this too is, and on any of these boundaries, is figuring out way ahead of time what your boundaries are and reinforcing and speaking up about them earlier and earlier so that you don't, as much as you can, be in control of anything so that you don't end up in moments where it's too late and the boundaries are crossed, you know? So that can be, for example, not that you can guarantee anything because people get hurt in ways that maybe they'd never expect, but listening to your gut and saying no the first time you feel uncomfortable about anything, like they made a sexual comment that you're uncomfortable with. Keep that in mind. Listen to your body about how it made you feel. Say no to the second date. Or they touched your leg in a certain way, made you uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Speak it out loud so that they know that this is a line. They cross it again. Decide ahead of time. These are things that I will not tolerate, and I will leave, or I will say no, or I will do XYZ if it's crossed, so that you're not in the heat of a moment having to decide then. what am I going to do? So there are definitely tools that you can teach and give people. And in various situations, there'll be ways where it's harder or not possible to speak up. But I think there's a sense of at least feeling empowered that my sexual life is mine and I can say what I want or don't want to happen to it. And I can change my mind at any time. And that's not like the other person's feelings about that is way less important than preserving what I want to preserve for myself, you know?
And we'll actually put together both physical boundary and sexual boundaries together when we're talking about domestic violence, where, a woman mostly are the victim of the situation. And when we want to talk about LGBTQ community too, it could be either one of the both, you know. So it's to set, like you said, to set that limit from the beginning and
Yeah.
to understand, and it could be woven into the culture to, oh, in terms of domestic violence of a relationship, what will people say if I leave this relationship? What could happen
Hmm.
if I leave this marriage? Will that impact my children if I leave this marriage? Which also attached to emotion that you already.
Yeah, a lot of these things are like interconnected. And I think too, when you bring up community, one of the functions of when someone's a perpetrator of domestic violence is that they will isolate you so that you don't have support. And again, it's easier to say than to do, but like not only speaking up about your own boundaries or leaving sooner rather than later if you're able to, but telling other people before you become more and more isolated. I think people feel a lot of shame because there is a lot of like I think especially in a lot of Nigerian culture and immigrant cultures, like the value of marriage and the idea of marriage being the most important thing you can do, especially for women sometimes. And in some extreme cases, people want you to stay in any relationship or marriage by any means, no matter what's happening to you. But if there's any trusted person in your life speaking out and saying, like, this is what's happening, also so that you get real feedback from someone that you trust. Because when it's just in your mind and you're already being emotionally manipulated by the person, they've probably already gone through the cycle of like, "Oh, but I'm really sorry. It was just one time. It's because you made me mad. I was just drunk." All of the different things. Um, Someone hearing it who cares about you in your community from the outside can say a reality check of like, "It's not okay. Like, do you need help? What can we do?"
Yeah, yeah, that's so important. So if people listening, you have to dig into this book. I suggest buying this book to dig more into it, which we're going to cover many things later on. So on material boundaries, what are the emotional costs of not setting limits with our belongings, money, and resources?
Yeah. The material boundary thing is interesting because sometimes it can feel like for a lot of people that I'm obligated to help. Speaking from the immigrant kind of dynamic too, where people might be coming to the US or to whatever other country and have family in their home country who they know have a different economic situation. And it's like, all right, now this person is asking, can I have money for this or that? Or just having different ideas about like, some people will think you've gone to America and are making so much money and you have maybe such an easier life. But again, too, like being able to say no. And it doesn't mean that you're hurting the person. It doesn't mean that you're not a good family member if you can't, or even if you just don't want to give, or maybe you want to support them in an alternative way that's not giving money or materials or anything. I think on the other side, too, of like having boundaries that are too rigid with material boundaries is like, how do you spend any time with anyone if you can't be generous in any way, or share in anything? So, yeah, I think this definitely is a difficult one that people deal with in terms of money. Um, again, to kind of feel like they're fulfilling some obligation or feel like a good person. There are some people who will never say no to giving things away to the point that they're then suffering. We've heard how can you pour from an empty cup kind of thing. So I think making sure that you're in a stable place and then deciding how do I actually want to share my money or my car or let so and so come stay at my house and for how many weeks and whatever it is.
Yeah, to set limit because that's very important. I always tell people who housed another person into their home and say, "Oh, I'm just want to stay for 2 weeks." You make sure it's only 2 weeks because that's maybe emotionally the limit you can take. Who are visiting your home. It's not because you are not being nice, but that is how much you can take. Like you said, in terms of also material things, sending money back home, helping people back home. A lot of people feel obligated. But now I'm seeing more on social media that many people are actually speaking against it, that the only person you're responsible for are your parents. Every other person, take care of yourself. And then you have
Mhm,
issue also coming from a society, a culture whereby people have 5, 7, 8 children that they cannot
mhm,
afford to take care of. Comes the responsibility, like you said on your posting one time about the first child, the
mhm,
firstborn experience, especially the first daughter. You have to
mhm,
bear the brunt of all these things. Like what you said about physical boundary as well as emotional boundaries, all those things interwoven together. And also, when I think about especially in Nigerian community, I don't know whether you know this essence of when somebody is having an event or they having what do they call it? They having maybe naming ceremony or wedding.
mhm,
Everybody wear the same outfit. You know,
mhm,
so much money there to the extent some people cannot actually be able to afford it, which is
mhm.
they originate from the Yoruba tradition, whereby everybody wear the same thing. But how do you set boundary towards all those things and said, you know what, I'm not gonna wear it because I cannot afford it, or I don't actually believe in it.
Yeah. I think like you said, just direct communication is the solution to a lot of things. And I think people are afraid to talk about details, especially around money and things, because that can be a sensitive topic. Like, for example, with the staying at someone's house example, someone may say, like, oh, I just need to stay for 2 weeks. And then out of kindness and compassion, you let them stay. But like, don't be afraid to talk about the details. Okay, where are you going after 2 weeks? What are you gonna be doing in while you're here in the city for 2 weeks? Like, what's the plan? All of those details. If you wanna go to someone's wedding and you can't afford the fabric or the to do that should be, how can I participate in a different way? How can I still support you? I think there's a way to, like, maintain relationships by directly communicating about details and directly communicating about alternative plans. If someone doesn't want you to come to their wedding because you can't afford the fabric, then, how close of friends are you really? If those things are the things that matter the most or but yeah, so it comes down to like, how can we communicate the most directly what each other's needs are and respect both of our perspectives on those needs?
On the boundary, the final one is time boundaries, as inability to say no with our time, often shaped by our culture or family guilt. How can people walk through this?
Yeah. Again, just directly communicating. I think like time is another thing where people feel like they should freely give and feel obligated to give. Or if they're not, especially in societies where it's so focused on work and capitalism, and people think that if I'm not working, then all of my time is free and I can't say no to anything else. And sometimes I tell people, one, you can just say no, that you don't want to go to that event or whatever it may be. But also, your time is yours. So even if it's just that you want to go to sleep early or you want to take a nap or you want to go on a walk, you're busy doing that, and you can say like, "No, I have other plans." And your other plans don't have to be some like grand scheme of like traveling somewhere or working somewhere, or being busy in a specific way. You can just be busy wanting to use your time in a different way. So there's definitely challenges in terms of people on the really loose side where they overbook themselves, show up to everything, say no to nothing, go to everybody's birthday trip, go to everybody's dinner, always using up their time. But then there are people on the opposite end where like they are like very overly rigid with how they spend their time and have like no flexibility. And I think that then you miss out on the opportunity to just relax.
Mm.
Um and to be spontaneous or to change plans or the things that uh, inevitably will come up in terms of how the time goes.
And it also remind me of something that we people of African descent, whether you're talking about African American, African immigrants, whereby we call it African time.
Yeah.
Where
Oh,
people
yeah. I know.
you say something is going to take place at 2, they don't show up until
Yeah.
2:33, and
Yeah.
then you are not realizing the people who are there early, you actually wasting their time.
Yeah. African time is definitely a thing. I think I read somewhere that time is also a cultural concept in the sense that in a lot of European conceptualizations of time, time is objective. And if the event starts at 4, it's starting at 4. Whereas in a lot of more collective cultures, like African cultures, the event starts when people get there. So, like, yes, we put a time on the flyer, but it really starts once, like, we're there as a community ready to start. And so people kind of know now that, like, if the event starts at 6, you put on the flyer 4 as the fake time, so enough people will show up by 6 so that it can really start because it was never started on time. At the same time, though, even in a an African community context, if you wanna be strict about your time boundaries, just start the event on time, and if they miss part of it, they miss part of it. Then at least with you, they start to learn like, "Oh, she, like, starts things on time." Like, "Oh, I actually missed this performance because they actually started at 6." And by that kind of repetition of reinforcing the boundaries, people will learn. But it definitely is a cultural thing, and I think for the most part, I've heard people say, "Africans are never gonna be late for a flight or a visa interview or like the important things. But for a party, just let the party start when we get there, you know?"
Oh, yeah, that's true. But we have to change that mentality. I remember you getting involved years ago in a meeting whereby, I was there early, an hour earlier, and the people started coming in late, like 45 minutes late. And I said, you set up this meeting at so time. Why are you coming in 45 minutes late? Oh, well, African time. I said, what about my time that you
Mhm.
wasted for me to that's inconsiderate. For me to be here earlier, I could have been doing other things instead of me being here at that time. So were you actually thinking that my time is valuable too? So it's something that we need to further communicate on that in our community.
Yeah. And I think for things like that are like time sensitive, a meeting, reservation where you have to actually show up at the time or it's not going to happen, you have to let it not happen sometimes. Like if the meeting is from 4 to 5 and they show up at 4:45 so they miss 45 minutes of the meeting, we're going to just meet for 15 minutes.
Yes.
Or if you didn't or citing how long your personal wait time is, or things where you're waiting expecting someone to meet you, like there are some people who I'm not gonna wait more than 30 minutes on an interview, on a date, on whatever it may be that we both knew the time, you didn't show up, half the meeting is over, or I just didn't feel like waiting. And if you wanna re-engage, we're gonna do it on time next time.
So I want to bring you to assertive communication and skill. You talked about assertive communication as a key tool to boundary setting. What does assertiveness mean to you, and how is it different from aggression or indifference?
Yeah, so assertiveness, like I started to allude to, is like communicating directly in a way that respects your needs and wants and the other person's needs and wants in perspective. Being too aggressive is like trying to force your will on someone else and not respecting their needs. But then being too passive is over prioritizing someone else's needs and not speaking up for yourself. So assertive is like a balance in the middle where you're going to say what you need to say. You're going to say it in a direct way, in a kind way. And it's not going to guarantee that the outcome you want comes out, but you will have known that you did the most effective and clear communication.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and can cultural background influence assertiveness in communication? For example, like they said in South Africa, Austria, or Germany, they are considered highly assertive when they are communicating. In contrast to low assertive culture found in many Asian or South American society, where they rely more on non-verbal clues or share understanding or direct language that transport meanings.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. There can be a lot of like by culture. I know for the most part, it's the characteristic that Nigerians are have no problem being direct, maybe sometimes aggressive, directly to the point. Definitely culture. I think also too the environment. Like I'm thinking about, for example, like the US corporate email environment where there's kind of a norm or an expectation that you're supposed to be super nice and passive in an email. Hey, just reaching out. Did you remember to file blah, blah, blah? Could you please, if you don't mind, and making all of these like tiptoeing kind of things. Whereas people would find it cold if you just send an email saying, hi, file the report by Friday. Thanks. But that, but that's not mean. That's just getting to the point of what you need to say. So definitely by culture, by specific environment, by the nature of your relationship with the person, you may be able to be like way more direct with a friend than you are with a stranger, for example. All those things definitely contribute.
Yeah. And you talk about being active participant in your life. Can you talk about the importance of being active participant in your life? What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So, like I said, with some of the people that I have worked with throughout my clinical experience, inspiring this book, there's a way where there's a developed helplessness about all of these things are happening. And I feel obligated to do this, or I'm super rigid about that, all these things. Where, yes, there are things that are outside of your control or your immediate influence in life, things that nobody can do anything about to immediately change. But for the most part, like, the goal should be to feel like you're doing life, not that all of life is just happening to you.
Mm.
Um, so it's about feeling some sense of empowerment, whether that is doing, I said, the work that you can do ahead of time to decide what are my limits and boundaries and expectations? How am I going to communicate? And then learning and practicing actively doing that. But also when situations outside of my control arise, how can I react and respond in a way where I don't feel overly passive or just, all of life is happening to me. All of, people are just enacting things on me, but I can move or change or leave, change my mind, speak up so that I'm having more influence on my own life. I tell people your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship you're going to be in, and life is the longest thing you're going to do outside of if people have any beliefs about like afterlife. Like people say life is short, but you're living your life every day. So be fully embodied and active in your life.
And so finally, for someone who always put others first, they don't even consider themselves. They Everybody else is more important than themselves. How can they start making this mental shift without feeling guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that it will be an adjustment, definitely. It may feel hard and they may feel guilty doing it at first. But I tell people just start putting yourself on the list. You're a person too. Developing that kind of self-compassion that you have or feel obligated to have for other people. You're a person too, and just start putting yourself on the list. Maybe it won't be that you start out putting yourself at the top of the list, but at least put yourself on the list. And that can be small things in terms of speaking to yourself in a more compassionate way in your mind, to more external actions in terms of the way that you physically take care of yourself and other things like that. And I think also too, like, there's something about experiencing, like, the experiential component of I see a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I could never say that because then they would hate me," or "I could never do that because then they'll think this." And in their mind, because they've never done something different, they've reinforced the idea that this is the consequence. Then they have the conversation or, say the thing differently or confront the person. And it's way less serious than they imagined it would be. So there's that experiential component of seeing, like, oh, I could actually say how I felt or say what was on my mind, or I could say no and it was okay. And then they get more and more okay with doing that. If you think, oh my gosh, my friends are going to hate me if I don't go to the birthday party, and you take the risk to send the text and say, hey, I'm not going to make it, but have fun. And then you see that, oh, you're still friends and it's fine and everything's fine. A lot of fear holds people back from taking up more space in their life. And so it takes practice.
That's so true. So thank you so much. So is there anything else we haven't covered that you think you could bring up in this conversation?
No, I think you asked great questions and we went through most of the outline of the book. I think for people who purchase the book, you'll get to also see specific clinical stories, of course, with the de identified information. So, no real names or anything, but examples of how these boundary issues come up and then some of the specific skills that you can start to use to communicate differently. So, I hope it's a good resource for everyone who looks into it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okosi, for this
Thank you.
incredible insight, communication. Your book, The Book of Boundaries for the People Who Makes Themselves Small, is such an important resource for anyone who is struggling to say no, setting limits, and prioritizing themselves. This book is also a lifeline for anyone who is struggling to speak up, to protect their peace, or to break free from habits of shrinking themselves. Be sure to grab a copy wherever books are sold, Barnes& Nobles, Amazon, and follow Dr. Okosi on our social media for more wisdom on psychology and self-empowerment. So what's your social media handle that people could follow you?
Yeah, so they can look at my website, www.growthworkpsych.org. And then I'm also on Instagram. Let me make sure I say exactly. My Instagram page is Dr. Okosi Psych. It's dr.okosi_psych. PSYCH.
Thank you so much for that information. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow Pansa Pansa Podcast. Leave us a review, share with others who need to hear about this. Until next time, remember your boundaries matter and so do you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansapansa.org. That is TALK@PANSAPANSA.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourself.